That part of process excellence that I term lean flow got its start in Japan with a gentleman by the name of Sakichi Toyoda, who was born there in 1867, appropriately enough, just 4 years after Henry Ford. And he's known as the father of the Japanese Industrial Revolution. He was an inventor, an entrepreneur, and he focused on the making and building of textile looms, first manual, and then by 1924 he had invented the Model G loom, which was the first automatic stop loom. And he built it with an ingenious set of mechanical sensors that would automatically detect when any of the warp threads, which are the threads that run lengthwise along a piece of fabric, when any of those broke, it would automatically stop. Now that's important because before then, automated looms would, even if a warp thread broke, would continue to make the fabric, even though this fabric is now defective. And consequently, there's a great deal of wasted material and time. And that's a big key to the thinking here, is detect the problem, detect the defect right away so as to eliminate waste. It also leverages people better because now up to 30 looms could be supervised by one person because they would be there amongst the looms, and if any one of the looms had a problem, it would automatically stop and signal the person to come over and reset it and restart it. This idea of automation, roughly translated, means into Japanese as jidoka. The philosophy that he brought to it was this idea of automation, intelligent automation, but he also had the flavor of automation with a human element. He was always wanting to combine the human element with automation as opposed to either or. Sakichi had visited the US, as had his son, Kiichiro, and both of them were inspired by this idea of getting into the car business. And so before he died, I believe in 1930, Sakichi tasked his son with getting the Toyota business into automotive manufacturing. And so they would need to figure out how to do that from scratch with very little capital, very little in the way of machinery. And so they would have to be by necessity, very clever. And one of the elements of this was just in time. And Kiichiro, in looking at how the Americans went about making the cars, realized that they could not copy, nor would they want to copy, the way of the American plants of producing lots of cars to sit in inventory, because that would just tie up a lot of money. So instead, he thought, we have to make what is needed, when it is needed, in the quantity needed, and where it is needed, so as to reduce these capital requirements. And so the idea of just-in-time, the idea of jidoka, were kind of coming together in Toyota before the Second World War started. As we know, with the defeat of Japan in the Second World War, the country and companies like Toyota had to start all over again from scratch. But Kiichiro resolved to fulfill his father's vision. He asked his cousin, Eiji, to help him with the automobile development. Eiji tapped a very smart machine shop manager by the name of Taiichi Ono to help lead the development of their methods. And so with jidoka, just in time, we also see things like this idea of pull manufacturing, which is this idea of doing an activity only when the customer of your activity, which is the next step in the process, triggers you or signals you to do this, as opposed to just doing something and pushing your work along and possibly creating a lot of waste. And I believe the story is that I think it was Taiichi Ohno who was on a road trip in post-war America. I think he had been visiting a Ford plant. And he went into a grocery store, a big chain at the time called Piggly Wiggly. And when you go to their refrigerator cases, like even today, and if you go to a grocery store and you pull out a can of soda, or in this case, a carton of milk, the shelves are usually on an incline, so that when you pull one out, the slot will get automatically filled and indexed down by that one unit that you pulled out. And of course, behind the refrigerator, you can see how full or not these rows are, and you can automatically then, that signals you or tells you to put in another carton of milk. So this idea of signaling based on someone pulling out a carton of milk is this idea behind, pull approach to process. All of this is to reinvent and reimagine the traditional process. So while they were awed by what they saw in the United States, they did not want to copy it, nor could they, because it was, in their view, wasteful of material, wasteful of capital, wasteful of human potential in terms of people wasting their time or doing tasks that were non or low value added. And I think that's a big key to understanding the origins of lean flow. It's not simply a technical exercise. It is as much about the behavioral aspects of process and the role of the frontline staff in the process, and consequently what the role of management is and the practices and behaviors of management. After the war, there are two major figures that in post-war Japan rebuilding. One of them is Edwards Deming, who studied under Ronald Fisher, had been influenced by Walter Shewhart. He was born, I believe, in 1900. During the 1920s, got a PhD in math physics. During the war, worked in the US Census Bureau, was also a consultant to the Secretary of War. And after the war, was tasked to go to Japan to help out in 1946 on food and agriculture issues, and then to help set up the census of Japan. But most critically, in 1950, he drew upon his experience with the statistical quality methods that he learned from Shewhart to run the first lectures on statistical quality control in that country, teaching the Japanese manufacturers how to build in quality rather than build stuff and then find the defects later, which very much mirrors Sakichi Toyoda's philosophy of we'll make it right the first time and don't try to find the defects. Deming was greatly admired in Japan. He had an award, a prize named after him called the Deming Prize. Interestingly, Toyota won that award, the Deming Prize, in 1965. The other gentleman who looms large in this story is Joseph Durand, who, like Deming, was influenced by Shewhart. During the war, Durand designed critical supply processes, and I think he was a very interesting counterpart to Deming. Not, I think, by any design, but I think by happenstance it worked out very well for Japan that they were being advised by two such eminent thinkers, but also very complementary. Whereas Deming's, at least at that time, I think focused largely on statistical methods. Durand also brought, though, sort of a management practices focus. So things like his push for cross-functional management to try to get out of these silos of thinking. I think it's also illuminating that he admired a book edited by Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, that came out in 1953, titled Cultural Patterns and Technical Change, looking at the impact of technology in emerging societies and pre-industrial societies. Japan was rebuilding, and they were trying to learn and apply these progressive techniques imported from America via people like Deming and Juran. Toyota was certainly benefiting from this learning, and they were continuing to build on the vision of Sekichi and Kiichiro and Eiji Toyota. And led by Taiichi Ohno, they were developing and codifying what would later be called the Toyota Production System, or TPS, as it was called in 1970. And for all of its potential, that branch of process excellence called process analytics, in the post-war time, essentially became a highly specialized, largely ignored by the boardrooms of the Fortune 500 realm. And Toyota is still largely an unknown company. And traditional process thinking, the very thing that Toyota really did not want to copy because of its waste, became the dominant way of doing things in the United States and Western Europe and really around the world. So as we end this segment, we have Toyota doing some interesting things, a potential in process analytics, and the domination of traditional process thinking in industry.